The wind moved across the Mongolian steppe like a ghost, cold, patient, and endless. Beneath a sky the color of iron, the bones of old wars jutted from the frozen earth. The air tasted of ash and silence. It was in this land, where cruelty was a form of weather, that a child was born who would one day erase civilizations. His name was Hulagu, grandson of Genghis Khan, the shadow of a god among men. His blood carried both genius and ruin. From his mother, Sorgatani Beki, he inherited restraint and intellect, a rare mercy in a house built upon fear. From his father, Talyui, came something darker, the instinct to rule through terror. Hulagu's cradle was the saddle. His lullaby was the scream of conquest echoing through the plains. In his earliest years, the stories of Genghis were not legends, they were scripture. The eternal blue sky, Timri, had chosen their line to cleanse the earth of arrogance and empire. The Mongols saw themselves not as destroyers, but as instruments of balance. To resist them was to resist heaven. And so, in the mind of the boy, slaughter became destiny. Mercy was treason against the divine. The world around him was vast and cruel. The steppe stretched in every direction, unbroken, indifferent, eternal. Horses thundered across it like rolling storms. The air carried the scent of sweat, iron, and burnt grass. Even as a child, Hulagu learned that silence was survival. In a court where brothers poisoned brothers for a whisper of power, speech was a weapon that often turned inward. He watched as men bowed to his mother, the Christian queen among horse lords. Her voice was calm, her counsel measured. When warriors argued, she reminded them of law. When they raged, she answered with patience. Hulagu studied her closely. He understood that conquest could be achieved with more than arrows. Power could also be built from silence, from the weight of one's gaze, from the ability to wait longer than another man could breathe. As the empire of Genghis fractured, Hulagu grew in its cracks. The death of Ogidi Khan shattered the illusion of unity. From the Volga to the Yellow Sea, the sons and grandsons of the great Khan turned inward. The once boundless horde splintered into factions, each claiming to serve heaven's will, each ready to devour the other to prove it. The dream of one empire became a map of rival hosts, their loyalties traded like horses in the dust. In this chaos, Monk Khan rose. He was Hulagu's brother, stern, unyielding, and convinced that the Mongol flame had dimmed. He called upon Hulagu not as kin, but as executioner. His command was simple and terrible: ride west. Break the fortresses of Persia. Burn the heretics from their mountains. Crush the Caliph of Baghdad, the keeper of false peace. Restore fear to the earth. The order was sacred. To disobey was death, to obey was damnation. Hulagu accepted without hesitation. The sky had chosen, and he would not question it. For him, conquest was not greed, it was obligation. He did not see cities, only targets. He did not see faiths, only obstacles between himself and heaven's will. He was not a man of hatred, he was worse. He was a man of purpose. The preparations began with ritual precision. Messengers galloped across the plains, bearing commands sealed with the black emblem of the Khan. Tens of thousands answered the call: archers, engineers, siege masters, men who could dismantle a city as easily as skin a deer. From the east came the sound of forges and hooves, of tools sharpened for an empire's next breath. The steppe stirred like something ancient awakening. Under Hulagu's banner, the host assembled, a moving city of tents, weapons, and fear. Smoke rose from 1,000 fires, darkening the sky. Horses stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath mingling in clouds of steam. The ground trembled beneath their weight. Hulagu watched it all in silence, a figure carved from iron and dust. His armor glimmered with the dull sheen of stormlight. Around him, the commanders waited, faces hidden beneath fur and frost. None spoke. They did not need to. The command had already been written in the wind. When the host moved, it did not march, it devoured. Villages vanished. Roads disappeared under hooves. The earth seemed to groan beneath the weight of history repeating itself. Hulagu rode at the center, expressionless. His eyes carried neither joy nor malice, only certainty. He had inherited his grandfather's calm, the calm of a man who believed destruction was a form of order. In the nights before battle, he would walk among the soldiers, wordless, his presence a reminder that the gods of the steppe did not forgive hesitation. Men would lower their gaze as he passed. They said his silence was heavier than any threat. They said the stars above him dimmed when he looked up, as if even the heavens flinched. Yet within that silence lay a question he never voiced: what remains after fear? For all his conviction, Hulagu felt the faint hum of unease beneath his armor. Not guilt, something colder. A whisper that conquest never ends, only changes shape. The Mongols called it destiny. Others would call it extinction. He studied the maps drawn upon parchment and memory, lines that bled westward toward lands he had never seen: Persia, Syria, the golden rivers of Mesopotamia. Each name was a promise. Each city a story that would soon end in smoke. He imagined the Tigris, blue and winding, soon to run black. He imagined towers falling like trees in a storm. He imagined silence, his most loyal companion, spreading across the world. But power, like fire, demands to be fed. And in Hulagu's heart, a spark of ambition began to smolder beyond obedience. He no longer rode only for monk or the blue sky. He rode for something deeper, the chance to carve his name upon eternity's stone, even if it was written in blood. He would not merely conquer. He would erase and rebuild. And in that rebuilding, he would become more than a grandson of Genghis. He would become a storm remembered by those who survived it. As dawn broke one final time upon the Mongolian plain, the horizon bled crimson. The riders stood ready, their silhouettes sharp against the morning light. Hulagu lifted his hand. 1,000 hooves struck the earth. The air trembled. The sound was not of men, it was the voice of empire reborn. He turned his gaze westward, toward the lands of prophets and kings, toward the heart of faith itself. The wind caught his banner, snapping it open like a wound in the sky. The steppe fell silent once more. And in that silence, history began to move. The desert stretched before them, ancient and unfeeling. Heat shimmered like the breath of a dying god. Hulagu's army, vast as the horizon, advanced without sound but for the rhythm of hooves. Dust rose in their wake, thick and choking, veiling the sun itself. To those who watched from afar, it seemed not an army, but a moving storm, sent by heaven to erase what it found unworthy of memory. Their first shadows fell upon Persia. The fortresses of the Nizari Ismailis, known to the frightened world as the Assassins, clung to the mountains like scars. For 2 centuries, they had defied kings and caliphs alike, sending blades in the night where armies could not reach. Yet even in their highest towers, fear began to whisper. Against Hulagu, no wall was tall enough, no faith strong enough to save them. Alamut, their fabled stronghold, stood proud upon its lonely peak, its walls carved from stone that had watched 1,000 winters. But even stone yields to fire. Hulagu's engineers arrived like executioners, their catapults assembled with patient cruelty. The sky filled with the arc of flaming pitch and thunderous stone. The mountain trembled. When the fortress fell, it did not die quickly, it burned for days, its libraries and gardens collapsing into smoke. Manuscripts of philosophy, astronomy, and poetry, centuries of thought, were reduced to ash. Knowledge became kindling. Faith turned to dust. They called it a victory. Hulagu called it purification. Yet beneath his calm exterior, there was no joy, only the certainty that this was merely the beginning. The West awaited, richer, older, and far more dangerous. Beyond the burning peaks lay the Abbasid Caliphate, the city of Baghdad, jewel of the Islamic world. For 500 years it had been the beacon of civilization, where the tigers cradled gardens, scholars, and light. Here, wisdom was written in gold ink, and every dome echoed with prayer. But wealth breeds arrogance. The Caliph al-Mustasim believed himself untouchable, wrapped in his lineage and pride. He had heard of the Mongols, but he thought them barbarians, transient thunder that would pass. He sent no tribute. He sent words instead, and words, to Hulagu, were lighter than dust. The response came not in parchment, but in iron. In the winter of 1257, the Mongol host surrounded Baghdad like a tightening noose. The city's walls, once symbols of protection, became its prison. From the eastern plain, the Mongols built siege engines vast as temples, machines that threw stone and fire with unholy precision. Day after day, their roar consumed the horizon. The sky itself turned the color of smoke. The air smelled of pitch and burning cedar. Inside the walls, panic spread faster than flame. The scholars and poets who had once debated the cosmos now watched their world collapse. The caliph prayed for divine intervention, but heaven was silent. His advisors pleaded for surrender, yet pride sealed his tongue. He sent emissaries to negotiate. Hulagu sent them back headless. The bombardment did not cease, it thickened, relentless, mechanical. The Mongols advanced inch by inch, their engineers filling the city's moat with timber and corpses alike. By February, the walls cracked. By dawn, they fell. The gate of Baghdad opened not to victory, but to extinction. What followed was not war, it was annihilation. The Mongols entered the city like an unholy tide. Streets filled with screams and smoke. The Tigris ran thick with blood and ink, its waters turned black by the manuscripts of the House of Wisdom, thrown into the river until its surface gleamed with the reflection of burning knowledge. For 7 days, the slaughter continued. Mosques, libraries, and hospitals, the lungs of civilization, were silenced. The stench of decay and oil hung in the air. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. In the palace, the caliph was taken alive. Hulagu ordered him brought before his throne. The conqueror sat unmoved, his armor streaked with soot, his eyes empty of triumph. To spill royal blood was taboo, so the caliph was rolled inside a carpet, then trampled beneath hooves until his bones sang beneath the weight of history. The dynasty of Abbas fell not with a roar, but with the dull rhythm of horses crushing silk. When it ended, Baghdad was no longer a city. It was a graveyard without names. The Mongols counted their spoils not in gold but in silence. They built pyramids of skulls, their symmetry grotesque in the torchlight. Even Hulagu, who had seen death since childhood, paused. The smoke curled around him like prayer gone wrong. He had destroyed the heart of faith and found only emptiness beneath it. His men celebrated. His generals feasted. But Hulagu stood apart, his gaze lost in the horizon. Victory had come too easily. He looked upon the ruins and understood that he had not just broken a city, he had broken the rhythm of the world. The scholars, the calligraphers, the dreamers, they had built bridges between heaven and earth. Now the bridges were ash, and the earth stood alone. Night fell. The fire still glowed, flickering upon water turned black as obsidian. The cries had stopped, replaced by the crackle of what once was knowledge. Hulagu walked through the ruins with only the wind for company. Each step echoed against the hollow bones of civilization. His face revealed nothing, but his silence was no longer still, it trembled. He ordered the rebuilding of certain districts, not from mercy, but from understanding. A land without labor cannot feed an empire. The survivors were spared to serve, not to live. He would erect his court upon these ashes, a new seat of power in the West. Yet even as he spoke, his words sounded foreign to him. The man who had cleansed the world of arrogance now felt its echo within himself. In the east, news of Baghdad's fall traveled faster than the dust of its ruins. To Christians, it was divine vengeance. To Muslims, it was the day the sky wept fire. To Hulagu, it was neither. It was simply the fulfillment of order. The eternal blue sky had demanded obedience, and he had delivered. But obedience, once fed, is never satisfied. It devours its servants, one by one. As dawn rose over the city of corpses, the river continued to flow, slow and dark, carrying fragments of parchment, bits of gold, and the reflection of a world unmade. Hulagu watched its current disappear into the mist. Behind him, the sun rose red, staining the ruins with light too cruel to be called morning. Baghdad, the city of light, was no more. And in its silence, a question began to form, quiet but eternal. What remains of faith when its symbols burn? The smoke from Baghdad's ruins had barely faded when Hulagu began to rebuild what he had destroyed. His empire stretched now from the Caspian to the Euphrates, a realm stitched together with terror and silence. But even fire leaves a residue, and within the ashes of his conquests, something unexpected began to grow, a hunger not for blood, but for permanence. Hulagu had shattered the world of faith. Now, he sought to shape what would rise in its shadow. He chose his seat of power in the highlands of Persia, where the air was thin and the horizon endless. There, he ordered the construction of new cities and gardens, observatories and palaces. From the ruins, he would carve a kingdom of reason, a monument to his endurance. He summoned scholars, physicians, and astronomers, men who once trembled at his name now called to serve it. Among them came Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, a philosopher who had survived the fall of Alamud by offering his mind to the conqueror who burned his world. Tusi became Hulagu's unlikely companion, an architect of the heavens in the service of a man who had erased them on earth. He proposed to build an observatory in Moraga, a sanctuary for stars above the ruins of civilization. Hulagu agreed, though his reasons were not curiosity but control. He wanted the sky itself mapped, measured, and understood, as if to prove that even heaven could be conquered. Under his command, the Moraga Observatory rose from the red hills, its domes gleaming like new moons. Inside, scholars bent over instruments of brass and glass, tracing celestial paths with trembling hands. Night after night, they charted the slow procession of stars, while outside, the empire's fires flickered across the plains. It was a strange harmony, wisdom reborn beside devastation. The conqueror had become a patron. The destroyer, a builder. Yet beneath this transformation, Hulagu remained what he had always been, an heir to silence and fear. Doku's Khatan, his Christian queen, moved beside him through this new world of paradox. Where Hulagu's voice was command, hers was counsel. She interceded for prisoners, protected monks and churches, and ensured that crosses were not trampled beneath Mongol boots. Her presence softened what little humanity remained in him. Together, they became a symbol of contradiction, a pagan empire that guarded cathedrals while desecrating mosques. When questioned by his generals, Hulagu's answer was cold and final: the sky protects all who serve its order. To him, faith was a tool, not a truth. The empire flourished on its surface. Trade routes reopened, caravans returned to the roads, and artisans rebuilt with trembling hands. Cities once silenced by conquest began to murmur again under Mongol rule. But beneath that fragile calm, the earth still remembered. In the east, whispers of discontent began to spread through the Mongol ranks. Hulagu's slaughter of Baghdad had not gone unchallenged. Across the steppes, Berk Khan, his cousin, lord of the Golden Horde, had converted to Islam. When news of the caliph's death reached him, he did not speak of politics. He spoke of sin. Berk sent word to Hulagu: the blood of the faithful cries out from the earth. You have angered heaven. Hulagu did not answer. He had long ceased believing that heaven could be angered. Yet the silence between them grew heavy, until it became war. The Mongol world, once united under the name of Genghis, now fractured into belief and vengeance. Brother rose against brother, faith against blood. The empire that had conquered nations now began to devour itself. The two armies met along the frozen river of the Caucasus. The winter wind howled like the ghosts of Baghdad. Hulagu's men, hardened and fearless, marched under banners stiff with frost. But Berk's faith burned brighter than Hulagu's rage. When the river thawed beneath the weight of their battle, ice turned to water, and the Mongol host was swallowed whole. It was said that the sky itself cracked that day, not from thunder, but from betrayal. For the first time, Hulagu felt the world shift beneath him. The invincible bloodline of Genghis was bleeding itself dry. The western campaign halted, his armies weakened. He turned inward once more, watching his empire through narrowed eyes. The observatory at Moraga continued its work, measuring the movements of stars that seemed now to drift farther away. Tusi wrote of planetary spheres and divine geometry, but Hulagu saw only futility. The heavens were orderly, men were not. No chart could predict the cruelty of ambition. And yet, the more he lost, the more he built. Palaces multiplied, temples gleamed, canals shimmered like veins of silver through the Persian dust. Hulagu's empire glittered like a mirage, its beauty born of destruction, its peace enforced by memory of fear. He ruled not with love, nor faith, but inevitability. His subjects obeyed because they could not imagine a world without him. The steppe had given him silence, and silence had become his crown. Still, he could not conquer doubt. At night, when the torches dimmed and the hills turned to shadow, he would stand beside Doku's Khatan and stare into the distance. She spoke of mercy, of redemption. He listened, but his eyes remained fixed on the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond it, a new enemy gathered, the Mamluks of Egypt, hardened soldiers who had once been slaves. They would soon face Hulagu's armies in Syria, and for the first time, the Mongol storm would meet a wind it could not break. In 1260, at the plain of Ain Jalut, the inevitable shattered. The Mamluks fought not for conquest, but for survival. Their charge broke the Mongol line like a blade through cloth. Hulagu was not present, his forces led by trusted generals, but the defeat echoed like a curse across his empire. The myth of Mongol invincibility died there, beneath the desert sun. What had begun with the fire of heaven ended in dust. When word reached him, Hulagu said nothing. He dismissed his attendants, closed the doors of his tent, and sat alone for hours. The silence that had once been his weapon now felt like a weight upon his chest. He had conquered faith, crushed empires, and bent the world to his will, but now even the sky refused him victory. Outside, the steppe wind carried the cries of horses, the clang of armor, the murmur of men who no longer feared their god. That night, Hulagu walked to the edge of his camp and looked toward the west, the land that had resisted him. The stars shimmered faintly, cold and indifferent. Behind him, the fires of his empire burned low. He understood then that the storm was fading, and what would follow would not be silence, but forgetting. He turned away from the sky, his face lit by dying flame. Even storms must break. Even silence must end. The sun over Rome had dimmed, as if even the heavens grew weary of Caesar's reach. His marble statues, once gleaming symbols of divine triumph, now cast long, uneasy shadows through the forum. The murmurs that filled the streets no longer spoke of glory, but of fear. Every senator's smile hid suspicion, every citizen's cheer trembled with doubt. For when one man holds all power, Rome itself forgets how to breathe. Caesar's rule had brought victories without end, yet within him, unrest grew like a festering wound. He had crossed the Rubicon, broken the Republic, and been crowned dictator for life. But what does a god crave once he has conquered the world? For Julius, it was love, not the love of the people, but of the few whose loyalty could not be bought or decreed. Yet love in a palace of ambition is a fragile thing. Even those who adored him began to fear the shadow he cast. Mark Antony remained fiercely loyal, his devotion half friendship, half worship. But others, Brutus among them, grew conflicted. To love Caesar was to betray Rome, to save Rome was to destroy Caesar. In the cold halls of the Senate, Brutus's conscience twisted like a vine between two pillars, honor and affection. "He is my father in all but name," he whispered one night to Cassius, his words trembling. "And yet if Rome falls to him, what fatherland remains for any of us?" Cassius, sly and sharp-eyed, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do not strike at a man, Brutus," he said. "You strike at tyranny. You strike to restore the Republic. History will forgive your heart." And so the whispers began, quiet, persistent, deadly. One by one, they passed between senators like an infection, spreading beneath Caesar's very throne. The Ides of March approached, unnoticed by the man who believed himself untouchable. He had dismissed omens before, the soothsayer's warning, Calpurnia's dreams of blood upon his robes, the trembling of sacrificial beasts. Cowards die many times before their deaths, he had laughed. The valiant never taste of death but once. Yet fate, ever patient, had been waiting. That morning, the air felt heavier than usual, as if Rome herself held her breath. Calpurnia clutched his hand, begging him not to go to the Senate. I saw you dead in my sleep, she cried. They bathed their hands in your blood. But Caesar, ever proud, kissed her forehead gently. My dear, he said, these men would not dare. When he stepped into the forum, the people bowed, though their eyes flickered uneasily. The Senate steps gleamed white in the morning light, and at their peak stood destiny itself. Within those walls, blades waited, wrapped in togas, hidden beneath trembling hands. Brutus stood among them, heart-pounding, every breath an argument with himself. He thought of Caesar's kindness, the nights spent in council, the trust between them. But he also saw Rome chained by one man's will. Cassius's words echoed in his skull like a curse: if Caesar lives, Rome dies. The chamber filled with the rustle of robes and the murmur of respect. Hail, Caesar, they greeted him, voices too rehearsed. He smiled, the smile of a man who believed every heart still beat for him. Then, as he took his seat, Tullius Cimber approached with a petition. Caesar, he said, grant my brother's pardon. Caesar waved him aside. Your brother's crimes are not mine to forgive. Cimber fell to his knees. I beg you, great Caesar. Stand, man, Caesar replied, growing impatient. This is not the time. And then came the signal. Cimber's hand clutched his toga. Another senator stepped forward, then another. Caesar frowned, confusion flashing across his face. Why, this is violence, he exclaimed, and in that instant, steel flashed. The first blade struck his shoulder. The second his ribs. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. Traitors, he gasped. Steel clattered, robes flared, voices rose in a frenzy. Senators became butchers. The chamber echoed with the wet sound of murder. Then, Brutus. Caesar's gaze found him through the chaos. His expression softened, confusion melting into sorrow. Et brute, he whispered, the words not of accusation, but of heartbreak. And with that, Rome's greatest conqueror fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, beneath the shadow of the man he once defeated. Silence followed, thick and terrible. The senators stood frozen, blades dripping, breaths ragged. Outside, the city still bustled, unaware that its heart had just been pierced. Cassius looked down at the body, then to Brutus. Now, he said, Rome is free. But Brutus did not feel free. He knelt beside Caesar's corpse, trembling, as though the marble floor beneath him had turned to ice. Freedom, in that moment, felt colder than chains. When the doors opened and the people learned what had happened, the air filled not with cheers, but with screams. Mothers wept. Men stared in disbelief. The tyrant was dead, yet the sun seemed dimmer still. For they had killed not merely a man, but an idea. As the conspirators fled through the streets, they realized too late that they had freed a storm. For out of Caesar's blood would rise vengeance, a vengeance with the face of Rome itself. The republic they thought they had saved began to fracture, piece by piece, as if Caesar's dying breath had cursed it. And somewhere in the distance, Mark Antony was already preparing to speak the words that would ignite the city in flames. The world had shifted. The gods of Rome had fallen silent. And as Caesar's body lay still upon the Senate floor, a new power began to stir from his ashes.